Now we've gotten our page to respond to a button click. The next thing to look at is, okay, so let's say we have some data to access, and we created that data access layer. Now that data access layer is accessible on the server side, and we made it accessible by injecting it with dependency injection down here in the data access layer, or in the site configuration, and we were able to access that from the server-side version of our to-do page here. But how do we do that same sort of thing if we have a WebAssembly page which is running on the front end? You can't access it from here. So, yes, we could create a list of to-do. And you see, oh, okay, well, yes, we made the to-dos accessible. We have a reference from the to-do server-side project entities, but now we need to do the same thing with clients. So we're going to add a project reference here and give our client application access to this so that we can access it here. So using entities, yep, there we go, models. And then, of course, I changed it to to-do items, or to-do item. And so we have access to this now. That's fine. And then, if we were just following the normal process, we would override the on-initialized async, and we would want to get access. So let's see, can I inject my I to do, let's see, how did I write it? Can I inject this here? Well, it doesn't know what an I to do DAL is. Okay. Well, you know what? It's going to need the same type of data access, so why don't we take these interfaces and put it into our entities folder. And then this won't be to do DAL, it'll just be entities interfaces. And then I'm going to take them out of here. And let's make sure it should be giving me an error, I think, here. Oh, maybe it figured it out. Okay. That's fine. So now we've got these two. And just like we had in our server project, in our client project, we have an imports.razor, so we could take these using directives that we're likely to need everywhere and put them in our imports. Okay, so now we can, oh, look, we're looking good, right? So I have a DAL. And if I were to run this, let's see what would happen. Build errors. What's the build error? I think that one is related to I need this over here as well. That can go away. That namespace no longer exists. It's now here. This one's good here. And let's see where we're at. Okay. And the mock doesn't know what it is. Ah, okay, so we need to change this to its new location. Easiest way is just to let it do it for us, because we're programmers and we're lazy. That doesn't exist anymore. And we'll add the reference back. And let's see, did we get all the renaming done? Okay. And now something seems broken again. Cannot provide a value for property DAL on type, blah, blah. There is no registered service. Oh, okay. Well, we registered the service in the server side. But not in the client side. So in this client, we haven't registered. So, well, we can do that. Let's say builder.services.add transient. And then we're going to add an I to do DAL and to do DAL. Wait, it doesn't know what that is. Why doesn't it know what that is? Oh, well, that's because our DAL is down here. Well, the temptation would be to move this up to the solution. But to save you the heartache that's going to happen with that, that ultimately will not work once we're working with a database. And the reason is that you can access a server directly from, or you can access your SQL client and your database client usually directly from the server. But you can't, and you wouldn't want to, be able to access your database directly from the client, which would be the user's browser. If the user could just log into your database and get to it directly, that would be a bad thing. So we are going to have to create a access layer for that. We're going to have to create a web API on our server and access our data through our web API. And so here I could add a new folder and call it APIs. And here we could add a new class And let's see, do they give me a template for it? Because that would be really cool. Raise your component. Let's do an API controller with read, write, actions. I'll probably modify it heavily. And I'm going to call it to do controller. And so, yeah, we got this nice little controller. And for now, we only need, we haven't implemented any of this. So I'm just going to comment out all of this. Now, this controller can, because this controller is in the same project as a server, this controller can get access to this data access layer through the injection that's in through this. Injection of our data. So I'm going to add a constructor. By the way, those of you who are using primary constructors, you can do it with primary constructors. I just want to kind of keep it fairly fundamental. I find those can obscure things sometimes. So what do we need? We need a data. We could bring in the. We already have access to things with our data access layer. So I to do DAL. DAL will create a private I to do DAL data access layer element and assign that in. So we're going to inject this data access layer. It's already got all the connections we need for the database. This will return an IEnumerable of to do. We'll add let's see, traces. I'm going to need that, and this is actually to do item. Get rid of that. So since this is async, our get is going to have to be async. And this will reuse data access layer that we already have to get our data. Now we have this controller, and we can now use this from our front end page. So in our client then, we need our own data access layer. So we're going to add a new folder. I'm going to call it, it's going to have its own data access layer folder. And then we're going to add a class which is called, which we'll call to do client VAL. And this won't really be a mock. This will actually be, this can be the real thing. And it's going to implement the same and in here we're going to write code to get to this controller and get our data. The documentation for calling a web API is located here in on Microsoft's Learn website. And if you scroll down here to calling a web API, there's the server-side approach, which usually you're not calling a web API from the server side because you have direct access to your data directly. But most often you're going to be using this where you're calling from a client side. So we need to register a HTTP client in our program.cs. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to go to program.cs under my client. So we're adding in an HTTP client, and that means I need to know what my local host number is going to be. So I'm going to comment this out for a second, make sure, hopefully I don't have things too broken. Which means that now I can inject that here. So we have an HTTP client, and now I can use this Now for my controller route, it's going to be API / name of the controller. That's to do. So the identifier here will be the name of the class minus controller. So this should be API / to do. And we are going to get that and return this. We'll give it a shot. We're getting pretty deep here without being able to test. But this is a to-do access with a get all async. And so now I can go back to my program.cs here. Let's see if can we and we're going to, what did we call this? To do client DAL. Looks like I capitalized it. Add that. So now we've got this injected into with our going through our so this is accessing our API. This is our data access layer. This is the actual API. And then we can go back to our page here. We've already injected the data access layer. And so on initialized, we should be able to say to-dos is equal to our data access layer dot So we'll load up the to-dos from this on initialized. And let's see. I suppose I could reuse that. So it's going to check, see if it's null. I'll see loading, and then when it has it, it'll go through and list all the to-dos. So to create our API, after we've created our controller, we need to register our API on program.cs. The documentation for that is under APIs. And if you look at overview, it shows you the code. Now there's two styles of APIs. There's the controller-based and the minimal API approach. I'm going to use the controller-based one. And what we need to do is we need to add controllers, and then after the app is built, we need to map our controllers. So we'll do that here. And then down here before the end, we'll map our controllers. Now, once we have that, we have our controller that we created. We've commented everything out and just have a get. We can run this. And the route is going to be API/to-do. I put a stop point here to see that it does in fact go there. And then I will continue. And we can see, yes, we are in fact getting our JSON object with our data. Now, right now, we haven't controlled this with authentication and authorization. I'm just working on the fundamentals here for now. So we've got that working. Now we can go to our, let me close some of these things out. Don't need that, don't need that, don't need that. And so back on our client-side page, let's see if we have it working. So notice that we now have it working. We're able to use our data access layer. We're getting that, but we still have that pre-rendering issue. And again, we could handle that by canceling it, or by disabling it. And that would work. But the better approach is to just use what we did down here and bring over our persistent render state. So I'm going to bring this over. I think I need stream rendering. Bring over my persistent data object. This needs to be now to do WASM page. I need a persistent application state object. And I need to use this approach for getting my data. So now we're using the persistent component state subscription object. We have all of the same things we had in the server side to persist our state. I brought in the stream renderer. Let's see if that works. I think it is. So with the stream rendering, we get the loading indicator. We have the to-dos show up, and then we have the WebAssembly load up, and it's functional. Now, the one thing we don't have is this button being available until the whole WebAssembly program gets loaded. But this is pretty good. And this is an effective client-side application. Of course, we would add more CRUD methods and continue on, but that's if you've already built some pages with CRUD, it's just extending out what this framework. So this gives you the basic structure of what a front-end WebAssembly application would be. With interactivity, you're going to want interactive WebAssembly. You'll use a stream renderer to show things as they become available. You'll inject a persistent component state object. Have your persistent component state object here. Have a persist data method. Dispose of it at the end, and then in your on initialize, you're going to check. So same structure as the stream rendering or the interactive server component, except that you're doing this from the front end, and we are employing a web API to provide the data from the server to the client. So we have this controller here that's providing data. Thank you very much.